Concepts are what drive your architecture projects forward. They are the fundamental items underpinned to every single studio project in architecture school and play an important role in determining if your project is going to be successful or not. Without a concept, your project has no legs. But with a concept, you can find that passion and find the fuel to drive your project to a new, higher level. For Studio 4, our teachers gave us a brief that had a focus on just the design concept. There was little focus on budget, structure, detailing, and those sorts of things. But this gave us the opportunity to completely immerse ourselves in the purity of creativity in architecture, the design concept phase. I'll be going over my Studio 4 project, which has been one of my most successful studio projects to date, and I'll be explaining to you how you can come up with successful architecture concepts for your projects. There is a lot that goes into an architectural concept, and I'm going to go over an exact strategy plan for you to follow to create successful concepts for yourself. But if there was one thing that I could tell you, one piece of information that you could take away from this video, it would be this. The most important thing to know is that a concept takes time to develop. What I mean by this is that it's not something that you can just pump out in 20 minutes. It's not just a word that you can pull out of the air, or it's not just a diagram that you can draw just one time. It's an idea. It's a multitude of ideas. It is not something that is just picked out of thin air and chosen, but it's something that's formed and developed over time. Let's think back to the forming of the Earth. The valleys and the mountains weren't just placed there, scientifically speaking, but they were formed over time through natural processes of volcanic eruptions, wind, climate, temperature, water, natural events that formed the rocks of the earth over millions and millions of years. Your architecture concept is the same. You could spend millions of years on it if you wanted to, but your architecture concept is an idea that is formed over time from external elements. Just by working on your project and spending time developing your ideas. It needs time to stew up and ferment. And this doesn't just mean waiting patiently at your desk. Here is the exact process I use to stew up the perfect concept. Step 1 is distilling the brief. All studio projects begin with the briefing. In architecture school, you're given a brief, which is a document outlining everything that needs to be done for your project. But in real life, you'll need to talk to your client to figure out their needs and aspirations and their desires for the project, and then create your own brief document from that. Ultimately, you're trying to understand what it is that is being asked of you so that you can create a good outcome. And the briefing process is fundamentally where you see projects rise and projects fall. How important the briefing process actually is often overlooked by architecture students. If it were me, I would spend a whole day underlining, highlighting, and going over the brief to understand what is being asked of you. And this is where your first ideas will start to cook up. Really, step 1 for distilling the brief is trying to sum up the brief into your own words. Do not underestimate the power of who, what, where, why, how. Ask yourself these questions when trying to understand a brief, and then answer them succinctly in a couple of sentences or less. Who is this brief for? What is being asked of you? Where is this project located? Why does the client want what they want? And then how can you go about designing this? List everything you can in this first step. But ultimately, you want to try and distill down this big brief document into a couple of key words. That's the whole idea of this first step, the process of distilling it down, this big document, into just 2 or 3 key words. And that filtration process works by reading it over and over and over, understanding it by highlighting keywords, underlining bits, taking sentences out and rewriting it in your own words. To take the brief you're given and formulate that into a brief that is of your own words, that is succinct and easy to understand for yourself, written in your own words. Find the parts of the brief that fire you up, and then take 2 to 3 keywords from that, and then use those keywords to drive the process forward. Step 2, visualizing the brief diagrammatically. Once you've filtered the brief into 2 or 3 keywords, then you want to start to visualize it diagrammatically. Take out your pencil and a bunch of sketch paper and begin writing down your keywords. Begin drawing what you think these keywords look like. Don't hold back, just draw anything you can think of that comes to your mind. Keep it, don't throw it out. Just start layering up your sketch paper and just keep drawing over it. For my Studio 4 project, I began with just a piece of paper and I drew all over it. And then I laid up another piece of paper and I just kept drawing. I drew all over my other drawings and I was just layering up pieces and pieces of sketch paper until I had a whole folder of 100 pages of A3 pages just with concept sketches that are diagrammatically showing what my concept is about. And because I didn't throw any of those out, I have a whole journey just exploring my concept from the very start to the very end. And you can see that process, and it's a process that takes time, that has taken, not just one day of jotting down pieces of information, but constantly revising it over the course of 6 months over my semester. You can see that initial sketch diagram all the way through to some of my final plans and sections that were sketched out on paper. And this wasn't a part of the project, but it's a really cool thing to add to my final submission, to have a whole folder exploring the process and the journey of your design. And I think that's such a cool thing to come back to. Unfortunately, I don't have that booklet anymore because my teacher wanted to keep my project for examples in future years, which is a good example to show that it was a pretty good project. I ended up doing really well for it. Step 3. Stay inspired. As you're sketching your 2 to 3 keywords in diagrammatic form, keep yourself inspired. Get on Google Images or Pinterest and just look up what your keywords would look like in an architectural form. Look at precedents, buildings that have already been built or designed using a similar concept or theme that you have. How do your key ideas look like architecturally in a built form? And just like keeping all of my sketches and all my diagrams in a little folder, I do the same with my inspiration. I look at all of my images and I go over the whole semester just looking at inspiration and precedents, and then I add them to a folder on my computer so that I can constantly revise them and go over them and look back at them and then use them for my project. So it's great to have a lot of sketches and keywords, but there comes a time where you just need to start thinking about your built outcome. If you find that you're starting to stagnate or get stuck in one place, move on. Constantly think about how you can continue to push the process forward, but then how can you come back to some of those starting things and then revise them over time? Because, rather than just staying in one place, rather than staying on step 1, maybe just jot down a few keywords and then just go from there. And you can come back to that over time and you can revise that over time, but you don't want to get to the point where you stagnate and you get stuck in one place, because then you start to lose passion and you start to lose that fire for moving forward. Step 4 is to consider the site. Think about the neighboring buildings and the solar orientation, the prevailing winds, and the site context. I always have a look in Google Maps or Google Earth if I cannot get on site, and then I just look around the site and take screenshots and take photos if I am at the site. Get as much information as you can about the site. You'll never regret getting as much information as you can about the site when you get that opportunity to. Have a look at which way the site slopes and where the fences are, what the neighboring buildings look like. Again, you can take photos of these and screenshots from Google Earth and you can add that to another folder called Site Analysis. And you might be wondering how site analysis has to do with coming up with a concept, but it quite inherently will help you move your process forward in coming up with a design, because you'll look at what's existing there and it will create ideas that will flow through your mind, because then you can start to visualize what your design can actually start to begin to look like. Step 5 is revision. Each step in this process to create successful design concepts for your architecture projects should be revisited over time. Don't be afraid to return to step 1, and don't be afraid to revisit keywords or diagrams. In fact, your first idea is never going to be your final idea. It's going to be a journey of experimentation and trying new things. So just go with that and keep trying new things. Don't just get stuck in one place and stuck with one idea, because you never know, you might have something better come along, and you usually will. So as you can see, this process is involved just distilling down the brief, but now it's time to create some architecture. This is where you would now start moving into sketch plans and sections and then looking at them to scale and thinking, how is this space actually going to be used? If you want to see more of my videos, feel free to click that subscribe button and hit that bell for notifications, and I'll see you guys in the next video. Thank you so much for watching. Take care.